Demon AI. Demon AI.
If you break an arm, an X-ray gives you, a clean, glowing white line.
Right. Very straightforward.
Exactly. But how do you diagnose the root cause of deep psychological and spiritual trauma?
Yeah, that's a whole different ballgame.
It really is. Because when you're dealing with the internal architecture of a person's suffering, there's no simple imaging test. The symptoms are completely entangled in the very defense mechanisms the person has built just to survive.
The diagnostic landscape there is murky, to say the least.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you aren't just looking for a biological malfunction, right? You're searching for the hidden anchors of a person's pain. And the symptoms we observe on the surface, they rarely tell the whole story.
Which brings us directly to the focus of our deep dive today. We are looking at a really fascinating piece of writing from April 2026.
Oh, this is a great one.
Yeah, it's an article titled The Moment the Demon Slips, Finding Clues in the Chaos by Jim and Bradley. And this was published on a platform called The Exorcist's Bestiary.
A very cool title, by the way.
Right, so we are jumping straight into the practical clinical methodology of modern deliverance ministry, exactly as Bradley describes it.
And we should note, this isn't your Hollywood spinning heads kind of look at this.
No, not at all. Our mission today is to understand how practitioners in this specific field use what they call demonic pushback, but not as something to fear.
Right. They use it as literal, actionable diagnostic data to map out a person's internal wounds, which is just brilliant.
It really is. Regardless of your personal theology, the psychological dynamics outlined here, how an adversary's overreaction actually reveals its hand are just so fascinating to look at.
Completely agree. And we're going to dissect the mechanics of this inner healing impartially. We're focusing strictly on the framework that Bradley's provided for us.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how a demon makes a mistake or, how it slips, we first have to understand the fundamental goal of the exorcist in this model.
Because it's not what most people think.
No, it isn't just about yelling until a spirit vacates a room. The focus is entirely on healing the human being's specific pain.
Yeah, the eviction of the entity is almost a secondary byproduct of the primary goal. And that primary goal is inner healing.
Right. So according to this methodology, the demons capitalize on very specific themes in a participant's life.
Exactly. So if a person carries a deep, unaddressed wound of, let's say, abandonment or profound shame, the entity anchors itself right to that specific vulnerability.
Like a parasite.
Yes, exactly like a parasite. So to remove the entity, the practitioner must first figure out why it's there in the first place, and then, facilitate healing for that foundational wound.
It's like, okay, think of it like an undercover cop infiltrating a criminal syndicate.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. If the cop just sits quietly in the corner during a meeting, they are practically invisible. They blend perfectly into the background noise of the syndicate.
They're just part of the furniture.
Exactly. But the moment the mob decides to execute a hit, and that cop actually has to actively interfere to stop the crime from happening.
They blow their cover.
Yes, they blow their cover. The act of pushing back is the exposure.
That analogy perfectly captures the dynamic here. The necessity of defense forces the entity to reveal its position.
Because it has no other choice.
Exactly. When a deliverance minister probes a specific area of a participant's life, the occupying entity can no longer just sit in the corner.
Right.
If the minister begins bringing healing to that specific wound of abandonment we mentioned, the entity is in danger of losing its anchor. It has to actively interfere. It generates chaos, to protect its real estate.
And the text notes that as the participant is guided to confront these themes, the entities push back incredibly hard.
Oh, massively.
And it would be really easy to look at that sudden escalation of chaos in the room, like the sudden fatigue, the participant wanting to run away, the emotional spikes, and think, oh no, things are getting worse.
Right. You'd think the process is failing.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating here is that this aggressive pushback is the exact opposite of failure. It is highly concentrated diagnostic data.
Wow. Okay, so chaos isn't just noise.
No, chaos in this context is directional. When an adversary strikes, it reveals the angle of its attack.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. As the exorcist observes what the entity is doing during this pushback, they can pinpoint exactly what the demon is trying to protect. The resistance itself becomes a map pointing directly to the root of the participant's pain.
So by desperately trying to defend its territory, the entity is essentially drawing a massive red X on the map saying the trauma is buried exactly here.
Exactly. If they just stayed quiet, they might remain hidden. But the imperative to survive forces them to, step into the light.
Which brings up the cognitive load required to maintain a deception under pressure.
Yes, it's exhausting.
When you apply pressure to the trauma, the entity's ability to maintain its subtle hidden presence just fractures.
It has to expend all this energy to derail the healing. And that exertion, that panic, is what leads to mistakes.
So they push back, but how do they push back in a way that gives up the game? Bradley outlines very specific tactical errors that these entities make.
Yeah, he calls the moments where they overplay their hand.
And the first major vulnerability he highlights is driven by sheer anger. Like when they get backed into a corner, they just get furious.
Oh, yeah. They lose their temper and start hurling insulting statements.
But those insults aren't just random, are they?
No, not at all. Those insults are highly specific psychological tells. If an entity is cornered and begins hurling insults specifically about a participant's worthiness or, projecting accusations of past guilt.
It's essentially confessing to the exorcist.
Exactly. It's telling the practitioner, this feeling of worthlessness is the exact insecurity I'm using to maintain my hold on this person.
It's just handing the practitioner the blueprint of the trap.
Yep, the anger just completely overrides their tactical patience.
But Bradley describes a second scenario that is even wilder. A scenario where they overplay their hand through temptation.
Oh, this part is brilliant. The text refers to this as the moment the entity jumps the shark.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Bradley talks about a participant being stuck in the lower levels of a temptation.
Right, like a subtle, insidious little voice that just feels familiar.
Exactly. But then suddenly the demon offers what the author calls a mega temptation.
A mega temptation.
Yeah, it throws out an idea or an urge that is like 10 steps past what the participant would ever genuinely consider doing.
So, to understand why this is a mistake, you have to think about the concept of cognitive habituation.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, over time, the human brain normalizes a constant, low-level negative stimulus. It's the classic boiled frog analogy.
Right, if you turn the heat up slowly, the frog doesn't notice.
Exactly. So if an entity is feeding a participant a subtle narrative like you're constantly letting your family down, the brain eventually accepts that as a baseline internal reality.
It just feels like their own thoughts.
Yes. It doesn't trigger the brain's alarm systems because it feels indistinguishable from the participant's own internal monologue.
It just blends right into the background noise of their own insecurities.
But that sudden spike in extremity, that mega temptation, is what shatters the illusion entirely.
Because it's too much, too fast.
Right. When the entity throws out a jarring escalation, maybe shifting from your disappointment to an urge to commit a severely destructive act out of nowhere, it triggers immediate psychological dissonance.
The alarm bells ring.
The human brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, just fires up. The contrast is so sharp that the participant's conscious mind violently rejects the thought.
They realize in an instant, wait, that's not me. I would never think that.
Exactly. The illusion is broken.
They get greedy for the quick win, and in doing so, they completely blew the operation.
Precisely.
It really subverts the whole master manipulator trope we always see. The adversary's own arrogance and impatience are actually their biggest vulnerabilities.
It reframes the power dynamic entirely. The entity is not omnipotent. It is highly prone to profound miscalculations when it gets desperate or impatient.
But anger and arrogance aren't the only vulnerabilities, are they?
No.
Because sometimes the mechanism of exposure is much more mundane, just pure sloppiness.
Yeah, simple slip of the tongue.
And the author shares a very specific, darkly humorous anecdote from his own practice regarding exactly this.
Yes, this part is fascinating.
Bradley says there was a time when an entity was being quite snarky with him during a session. And in the middle of this arrogant exchange, it casually uses the word we.
We. Just a tiny little pronoun.
Yeah. And Bradley catches it instantly. He responds, so there's more than just you, huh?
And the reaction that follows is incredibly revealing about the internal politics of these entities.
The text says the demon immediately went silent. Its eyes got deeply annoyed. It realized it hadn't been careful with its words, and it completely overplayed its hand.
Yeah, it messed up bad.
And Bradley notes that he could tell the others were not going to be happy with this particular entity for exposing their hidden numbers.
You really have to consider the cognitive burden of maintaining a complex lie.
It's got to be huge.
It is. When an entity is operating under the pressure of an exorcism, trying to manage the participant, defend the trauma, and verbally spar with the practitioner. Mistakes are inevitable.
So one arrogant, snarky comment unravels their entire concealed position.
Exactly. It exposes the plurality of the threat, which completely changes the practitioner's tactical approach.
It's like a bad criminal interrogation where the suspect accidentally mentions a detail only the killer would know.
Yep.
You can physically see the moment on their face where the realization hits them that they are caught. Their own arrogance bypassed their filter.
This raises an important question, though, about the practitioner's methodology.
Right.
How do you consistently catch those subtle slips? I mean, in a room filled with emotional chaos, trauma responses, and active spiritual pushback,
It's a lot going on.
it's overwhelming. So how does a minister isolate a single word like "we" or recognize a mega temptation for what it is, rather than just getting swept up in the panic?
That's a great point. Bradley explains that in his particular form of deliverance ministry, his primary aim is actually to address the Holy Spirit, not the demons.
Oh, that's a huge distinction.
Right. He focuses his attention upward on the healing source rather than getting down into the mud to spar with the adversary right out of the gate.
That upward focus is the calibrating mechanism.
Exactly.
If you spend all your time staring into the darkness, studying the chaos, you become disoriented. You lose your baseline.
You get lost in it.
By keeping the focus on the Holy Spirit, which in this model represents perfect peace, truth, and healing, the practitioner establishes a very clear baseline.
It's like signal-to-noise ratio in audio engineering.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
If you know exactly what the pure signal sounds like, any distortion or noise becomes glaringly obvious. You don't have to study the noise to recognize it.
And that ability to spot the distortion is the very definition of spiritual discernment here.
Right.
When a practitioner walks with wisdom and maintains that calibrated baseline, they have the clarity needed to spot these exact moments of overreach.
Because without that discernment, that slip of the word "we" flies right by unnoticed in the heat of the moment.
Completely unnoticed.
Yeah.
And without discernment, a mega temptation just induces terror and shame in the room instead of being recognized as a massive strategic error by the enemy.
Discernment is the lens that turns the adversary's pushback into your roadmap.
Exactly.
Bradley brings in a quote here that just perfectly distills this entire dynamic. He quotes Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings.
Always a good source to pull from.
Right. The quote is, "Let us remember that a traitor may betray himself."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that quote summarizes the core philosophy of the entire text.
It really does.
The adversary, by its very nature of being deceptive, arrogant, and lacking in empathy, carries the seeds of its own exposure.
Because they can't help it.
Exactly. A traitor betrays himself because he cannot fundamentally hide his true nature forever. Under the pressure of truth and healing, the facade always cracks.
So what does this all mean for you listening at home? We have navigated some intense, heavily psychological territory today, looking at the clinical diagnostic approach outlined in The Exorcist's bestiary.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
And the core insight we are pulling from Bradley's framework is that intense opposition is rarely just noise.
That is the vital takeaway for anyone navigating profound struggles.
Whether it's spiritual or purely psychological.
Right. Chaotic pushback, overwhelming negativity, sudden and jarring spikes in temptation. These are not indicators that you're losing the battle.
They aren't signs of defeat.
No, that are highly specific data points. They are maps pointing directly to the root of the pain that desperately needs to be healed.
So when you face that kind of overwhelming resistance in your daily life, maybe the move isn't to panic or retreat.
Exactly.
Maybe the move is to step back, calibrate your discernment, and look for exactly where the adversary is overplaying its hand.
Because they always do.
Finding that careless mistake, that slip of the tongue, that uncharacteristic burst of anger might just be the key that unlocks your path to freedom. It shifts you from being a victim of chaos to an investigator reading a map.
Which leaves us with a rather profound implication to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
We spent a lot of time analyzing the psychology of the mega temptation. That specific moment when an adversary pushes so far past the line of believability that it triggers the human alarm system and actually shatters the illusion.
Right, the moment their lack of empathy causes them to jump the shark.
If extreme escalation is the very mechanism that shatters an adversary's power, Is it possible that our own greatest moments of clarity come not from peaceful avoidance, but only after experiencing the absolute extreme of whatever we're struggling against?
Oh, wow.
Does the chaos have to peak? Does the pressure have to reach its absolute breaking point before the human mind can finally recognize the trap and see the adversary for what it truly is?
That is a very powerful thought to sit with for a while. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking for the clues in the chaos, and we will catch you next time.